Welcome everyone to this meeting of the City of Kawartha Lakes Heritage Committee. I'd like to start with the land acknowledgement. The City of Kawartha Lakes respectfully acknowledges that we are situated on Mississauga land and the traditional territory covered by the Williams Treaties. We are grateful for the opportunity to work here, and we thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. We recognize and deeply appreciate their historic connection to this place. We also recognize the contribution of Métis and other Indigenous peoples in shaping and strengthening this community. So at this moment, I'd like to call the meeting to order. And I'd like a motion to adopt the agenda. Ian and Anne. All those in favor? Thank you. Carried. At this time, I'd like to ask for any declarations of pecuniary interest on anything that may appear on our agenda tonight. There being none, to now introduce to plan. So I will hand it over to Emily to do the honors.
Okay, everyone, so we have a new planning liaison, which is great. So Megan Peck is joining us, and I'll hand it over to her and she can give a brief introduction to herself.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Emily. It's an honor to be here with you guys tonight. I'm a planner too at the City of Kawartha Lakes. I also have a degree in architecture, so I have a strong interest in heritage and architectural integrity and features of properties. So I'm looking forward to learning from all of you.
Well, thank you very much for coming to your first meeting, which is our last meeting. And hopefully we'll see you with us again when the new committee is formed. So welcome, Megan. All right, moving forward, has everyone had the chance to review the minutes? Are there any errors, omissions, or additions? Seeing none, I would ask for someone to move the acceptance of the minutes. Skip and Bill. All over. The motion is carried. So tonight, starting with a report, which is an objection to the listing of Prop 12 Helen Street, Fenland Falls. Emily, would you like to review your report?
Okie dokie, thanks, Ethel. All right, so this is an objection to a property that was listed in June of this year. So as if everybody remembers back to June, because it was a little while ago, we sent forward a large list of properties to council at that time, which council chose to list for the most part, except for a few properties where the owners objected when they were originally brought forward. We sent notices to the owners before the properties were listed in April, and then again after the properties were listed in June. The second one was the statutory notice, which let them know that they could officially object under section 27 of the Heritage Act. So in October of this year, after I'd spoken to them already, the owner of 12 Helen Street in Fenland Falls, which is the Handley Lumber Building, they submit us a notice of objection to the clerk's office. And one thing that you'll notice from our appendices is that we now have an objection form, which is really useful. So we don't just have random emails from people. So they filled out the form, they submitted it to myself in the clerk's office, and they outlined their specific objections, which is helpful. So the three things that they noted is that the property historically is not a lumber mill. It was reconstructed in 1936, so it's not 100 years old, and it doesn't have any heritage features or anything that is unique or special about it. So council makes the decision to remove from the register, but the Heritage Committee has to provide a recommendation to council first. So that's what this report is for. So the staff recommendation on this particular property is to leave it listed on the register because it has cultural heritage value as identified in the evaluation matrix, which is attached. So responding to the owner's objections, there's three main things. So the property historically not a lumber mill, that's actually correct, but the historic value of the property was identified as a planing mill as opposed to a lumber mill. And it was first built in 1900 and then rebuilt in the late 1930s. So that's the present building. So no, it isn't a lumber mill, but that's not why it was identified as being significant. The fact it's not 100 years old, this doesn't have any bearing on listing as there's no criteria under Ontario Regulation 906 that is about its age. And then the last one about it's not being unique or special or having heritage features. It's actually one of the most unique properties in Fenelon Falls simply because it is the only property of this type in the community. And it has a range of heritage features reflecting its industrial use. So that is the recommendation, and the committee can choose either to recommend to council to leave the property remain listed, or that the property removed from the heritage register as the committee so chooses.
My first reaction is that the objections seem to be not relevant to the listing. So I find that rather surprising. And as a resident of Fenelon Falls, I don't know any other building that looks like this in the city, in the town of Fenelon Falls. And in fact, there are a few that look like similar to this in the city of Kawartha Lakes that I know of. So that's my initial reaction. The floor is open. Let's have your comments. Ian.
Yeah, I find the objections pretty shallow, as I would imagine many of us do. The bit about 100 years old, I find that kind of amusing, actually. It's reminiscent of a comment made about a property that we dealt with earlier this year, where the principal objection was they've replaced the shingles on the roof, they've replaced the windows, ergo the property no longer has heritage significance. I just find it very kind of discomforting, actually, that heritage significance is now being kind of determined by the property owners themselves based on a very vague and quite shallow criterion. So that's all I have to say, but I would hope that we keep this on the list.
Any other comments? Bill Peel?
I guess my opinion is that if I was the owner of the building, as Mr. Hanley is, I wouldn't want it designated because the real estate value of that property is probably worth far more than what it's worth as a retail lumber business. That businesses like that are a dying breed, that with the competition of Home Depot and Lowe's and Rona, the big new one in Lakefield now, it's really hard to make a business go in the retail lumber business on the size of Handley Lumber. And I really don't find the building all that attractive. To me, it's kind of an eyesore in Fenelon Falls, but that's irrelevant. But I can understand why they would not want to designate it. I'm sure their goal would be to demolish it and sell the property, which is a very valuable property in that location. So for that reason, I would support the withdrawal from heritage designation.
All right, Anne?
Even if it's heritage designated and they decided to sell it and put up an apartment block, we could still work with them to protect the facade and keep it that way, could we not? Like, it wouldn't stop them from doing that. So have they spoken to you along those lines, Emily? Like, do they understand that they can do that?
Yeah, but I don't think they have demolition as a specific aim. I think they just don't want it to be listed.
Okay,
That was my impression of it.
thank you.
And just, I don't think that designation necessarily devalues or makes sale. So I would want to be cautious about as a to take it off the list. I don't think that it devalues a property at all, especially under this. It's just listed. It's not designated. The only thing that they buy, we buy with this process of listing is to get a 90-day chance to say, we'd like to designate it. So personally, I'm still in favor of keeping it on the list. Ian?
Yeah, just following up on what Bill Peel said, and also yourself, Athol. Emily, to be clear, this is being listed, it's not being designated. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So it was part of the kind of the batch listing that we did in the spring.
Okay. I just feel that we have to be cautious about not kind of loosely using designation and listing as synonyms, because I think that we risk confusing the public that way. So I think if it's being listed, and if there's no intention to, at least not yet, to do anything with it, and you know, to Anne's point, if there are concerns among the public about any kind of, about it being like an eyesore, surely there are ways that ways and means of mitigating that. But yeah, I'm certainly in favor of keeping it on.
This Fenelon Falls was a big partner and player in the lumber industry. And this is the last building that exists in our town that relates to that industry. There's no other remnant. So I think it's important that it be listed. Sandy?
I just wondered, Emily, if there's any more information in the letter that was forwarded to you, or the application from the business owner that outlined any other rationale aside from just the objection that it isn't. I think their impression was it isn't what we or you have, you know, think it to be. Is there anything else in the letter that communicates a rationale or why? Or
No, so what you have is everything I have.
Yeah.
So my other communication with them was really just them inquiring about the process of objecting.
of objecting? I see.
Yeah, so they didn't provide any other information. And I mean, my impression, which might have been wrong, was just that they would prefer it wasn't listed, and that they disagreed with the statement of cultural heritage value, but they didn't provide anything additional for us to work with.
And the point is, it wasn't listed as a lumber mill. It was listed as a planing mill, and there's a difference. So the thing they're objecting to it being listed as a lumber mill, well, yeah, but it isn't. So, Anne?
Emily, have you talked to them since the letter? Are you allowed to talk to them after the letter of objection comes in?
No, I haven't had any additional correspondence with them except noting that that this was coming to the committee. So that was the sort of the limit of the conversation.
Are you allowed to reach out and talk to them before it comes back to the committee, just to give them a different perspective than what they seem to have?
I was on mute there.
You're on.
I got it. Thanks, Ethel. I could. I mean, that's a possibility if the committee wants more information.
Ron?
Thanks. Just Ethel, just a question to Emily. If it's listed, would that prevent them from renovating it, or if they wanted to replace it, then they would keep the facade like we talked about this in another place on Lindsay Street that I think was the old Kent Hotel, where they were going to tear the whole building down, but they would keep the front part of it anyways, as a remembrance or some sort of a resemblance of what the former building was. So would this listing prevent them from totally renovating it or totally replacing it? Or would they, if they did replace it, I don't know them, but they're good business people, sure. But
Yeah,
if they
so-
decided, if they decided to renovate it or replace that building, could they do that?
Yes, if they want to renovate it, that's completely their business. They can go ahead and do that as long as they're not demolishing the building. The only restriction that would be on it would be if they want to demolish it, they give the city 60 days notice to decide kind of what we want to do with it. So really it gives us an option to, and by us, I mean council. It gives council an option to refuse a demolition permit by designating the property. That being said, I mean, that could take the form of a whole variety of different options. So really, it's just, it gives the city additional time to make a decision on the building if and when a demolition application comes forward.
But like Ian said there, like there's a big difference between listing and designation. If it's listed, then they can still apply for demolition.
That's right. Yeah, they can apply for demolition. It just means that council makes the decision about demolition instead of our building department.
And if it's designated, then they can't do anything to it then. Or they
Well,
can't
actually,
demolish.
they can. They would just have to apply for a heritage permit for
Okay.
that.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Skip?
Just an interesting thing. I take it that they're intending to continue to operate the business the way it is based on everything we know.
Yeah, they
As
use
far as
that
we know.
building. So I mean, Handley Lumber's been there for a gazillion years. Yeah.
What's interesting about it, you would think this would be a great marketing tool for them. Like a lot of people really buy into this as a heritage, longtime business. So it's interesting if they intend to continue to operate that they wouldn't want.
Julia?
Yeah, I'm a little bit on the fence about this one, like Bill. I see his point, but I think probably the owners are just not aware of what it implies. Like, I think we need to, like, Emily needs to maybe send them a letter and say, well, actually, if it's listed, then this is all it means. It's not that scary. But I also don't think it's that interesting a building when you look at it. So I'm a little bit on the fence. That's all.
One of the things that, the only thing I'll say to that is that it was a functioning planing mill. They weren't built to be the most attractive buildings on the block, but they play an important part of the fact that logging is what basically built Fenland Falls, the lumber industry and whatever. So if you take away the last remnant, there's nothing to remark that. Sandy?
I'm wondering also, Julia, I agree there. If it might be worth it to reach out and appropriate to open up some kind of dialogue in that perhaps the business owners at Handley's, maybe aren't aware of the benefits of the listing and perhaps could speak to some of the pieces that Skip was saying there, that this could be perhaps a positive if they were willing to. I'm not sure if we're able to do that or not technically once they've objected.
Once it objects, the committee must make a recommendation and it has to go to council. I mean, we can still reach out to talk to them about it, but they've sort of set the wheels in motion to move this legislative process along. One thing I will say is there isn't a time limit on how long the objection process takes. So if the committee wants more information before making a recommendation, that certainly, if the committee would like to make a motion to request more information and a discussion with the with the owners on this file, I can do that and then come back at a later date to the committee. Just hold on a second. I need to manhandle the dog.
Let's Bill until he comes back.
Sorry about that.
Okay, Bill?
Athol, do you know if it still operates as a planing mill or is it strictly retail lumber now?
It's retail lumber.
They do custom millwork there.
Yeah,
I'm not
they
sure
do
if
cut
it's in
lumber.
that building, so.
There's still some things happening. I'm not sure on how regular a basis, around the planing, but then it's still utilized.
A planing mill is taking rough sawn lumber and dressing it. I don't think they do that at all.
No, I don't think so either. But it's the last place in town that has anything to do with the lumber industry. And I mean, I deal with Chris Handley on other business in the town, so it really is a little surprising to me that he's objected. So, you want anybody else to go with you or talk? Emily, I mean, I'm willing to. Anne, was that your hand?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think we're battling the same issue here that we've battled on a few other, not battled, that's not the best word to use, but people just don't really understand the difference between listing and heritage. And I think as soon as they see listed, it just scares the bejeebers out of them. So I think that a conversation would be very worthwhile.
Okay, Ian?
Yeah, and just one more point for me to Anne's point. I think this is another case. It's not just a case of people not knowing the difference between designation and listing in the heritage process. It's also this possibly widely held assumption that to be heritage, the building has to have some kind of, very like high Victorian aesthetic value, or it has to be a certain age, like i.e. 100 years old. You can have buildings and properties that are 60 years old and don't really have anything to write home about architecturally, but they may have heritage significance for other criteria. So I think public education for all of these things is maybe something that we should maybe focus a little bit more on.
Certainly something new committee to talk about, and we've spoken about it here over the last couple of years, and that is that we need to be doing some public education about what heritage actually is. You can have a building that was built this year if there's something important about, say, the architect. If there's something important about who lived there, it can be designated for that reason. If some event happened there that was important, you can designate for that reason. It's not anything to do with 100 years or looks. Bill?
I'd like to make a recommendation that you go and speak to them, Athol, if you know them personally, and sort of explain what the difference is. But maybe if it could remain in suspension until you do that.
Well, ask Emily if officially that's part of what I can do, that need to be officially an employee of the town.
I think I may have to do it just because we're in kind of a legislated process. But I think what a motion that the committee could make, because I think it's valuable that Apple be involved because he knows them. I sort of kind of know them, but not not very well. So if the committee requests that staff, okay, how do I put this in a way that that sounds official? That staff reach out to the owner for additional information and report back to the committee at their next meeting. that directs me to do it, but really Athol could assist with that if you're good with that, Athol.
I think that, yeah, I think somebody needs to go and talk to them, and that it just surprises me that they would do this. Because they are pretty community spirited, and when we're approaching them for donations to things like Santa Day or anything else, they're pretty much there as a community. So maybe if we approach them that this is the last remaining best the lumber industry in our community, and it's the only thing it does is delay a decision for days. I mean, it's not the end of the planet.
I'd like to make such a recommendation, or a motion, I should say.
I'll second that.
All right, all in favor. The motion is carried. All right. Moving on.
Hold on, I'm just writing the motion down. Just give me 2 seconds. Okay, all good.
Okay. Moving on, we have the subcommittee updates. And let's go through with those. I think the only one that we really have an update for prior to going forward to the new committee is the Scugog River Subcommittee. And Ian, could you bring us an update?
Thank you, Ethel. So the Scugog River Designation Subcommittee is, I guess, what we're calling ourselves. And the purpose of the subcommittee, to brief those who may be new to this, was to look at the landscape on either side of the Scugog River within Lindsay and try to determine or ascertain what portions of it should be identified for heritage purposes. So the subcommittee rather, did 2 walkabouts on both banks of the river, the first on October 11th and the second on October 21st. And from those walkabouts, we have identified approximately 25 sites, items or places of historical interest, viewscapes, we're calling them, that should be considered, in our opinion, when going forward with this process. Just to clarify what the word viewscape means as we use it, a viewscape allows the public to view our cultural heritage without undue impediment, or to preserve the view or visibility of our cultural heritage landscapes. Some of you may recall, was it earlier this year or last year, whenever it was, that there was discussion about a potential development in William Street North that would involve, I think, an 11-story tower, and what that might do in relation to compromising sort of the heritage sight lines around it. So of these 25 pieces that we identified, some of these are obvious. For example, the viewscape that encompasses the spire of St. Mary's Church. That's one of them. Some of them are particular buildings that may or may not already be protected. And some of them are what look like bare pieces of ground, but may have had historical significance and right now lack interpretation. This is something that Laura Love might want to take note of. There are a lot of very remarkable and fascinating stories around our river here in Lindsay that simply have no interpretive signage to guide visitors or pedestrians who may be passing through these spaces. And that's something that probably should and could be looked at. So following our walkabout, we've discussed next steps. That includes doing up some kind of map that would have indications on it of where these different items of importance are. Opening discussions with Parks Canada is another step that needs to be taken, also with Trent Severn Waterway as part of that. And certainly consulting with Emily about how to best move forward on this. But what I will say is that our river and our riverscape, if I can call it that, hold a lot of really interesting stories that are worth acknowledging and certainly worth protecting. So that's really about it from me, but perhaps Athol, you might want to chime into this.
Well, I found the walks fascinating because there are just berms of land and they just run in particular places, and to not know that that was a railway system is sad. So there were lots of events and things going on around that waterway, which I personally didn't know and enjoyed finding out about. So one of the things we talked about was how we would investigate best to preserve this area, whether it's nation, or it's by secondary plan bylaw or some in cooperation with Trent Severn and Heritage, that we could to preserve this beautiful landscape, cultural landscape that we have in that area. And we did identify 25 different points of interest. So that's our sort of next steps if the new Heritage Committee proceeds with this project. That's sort of what we see as the next steps. Identification's done, and why we want to do it is done. So next steps is what should we do and how should we do it?
I think it makes sense for the subcommittee to meet again to discuss that when the new committee is in place. I mean, technically all of our subcommittees dissolve with the committee, but we'll just reform them again when the new committee starts up again after the appointments at the end of the month.
So this was our efforts to complete a work plan that we had stated to the city that we were going for 2022. And this report, Ian has done a beautiful sheet or something of our points and our reasons. And so the next step is let's get that formulated onto some kind of a map, which maybe GIS can help us with, giving us kind of a mapping of that area, and we can put points on it. And then we'll have something to go forward with discussions with the city and discussions with Parks and Heritage Canada and the Trent Severn. Ian?
Yeah, Athol, should Emily have that chart that I did up and circulated to the subcommittee members for her reference?
Well, I think it's part of the process, and sure, I would share it with Emily so that we can see if we can get GIS to help us with doing a map or something.
Okay. I'll
So
send you that, Emily.
We'll arrange to forward that to you, Emily.
Yep, sounds good.
Are there any questions about this so far? So may one move of this for information. Seconded by Julia. All those in favor? Thank you. The motion is carried. We have an item, we have no correspondence, I don't think.
No correspondence.
So we do have another item of new business. So Emily, would you like to share with us the events of the government?
Sure. I thought what I would do is I would do the fun thing first, which is kind of the FYI on the heritage inventory, and then we'll do the spooky thing from the province. Okay.
Okay.
So the first thing, I'm just going to share with everybody where we're at with the heritage inventory, just because I know there's some folks on the committee working on it, and I will show you what we have so far, and it looks super cool. Okay. Oh, there it is. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. There it is. Okay, so this is our heritage inventory work in Bobcaygeon so far. So all the dots are different heritage or historic buildings, because some of them have heritage. We'll say historic buildings and features that have been identified. So they're all color coded. The teal ones are residential properties. The purple ones are industrial properties. That kind of weird lime green color is commercial properties. The orange, it's institutional buildings, churches, that kind of thing. The yellow is landscape features. So I'm just gonna, so a lot of this is stuff that I've done, and then also Anne kindly handed over all of her photos and inventory sheets, which I've been slowly putting into the system. So we're getting there. And once the other ones are done up, I'll start putting these in as well, but I will just show you what they are so far and sort of how it looks like. Okay, this is an easy one because it's Kawartha Dairy, so we'll have a look at this. Okay, so when you click on a point, it comes up. This is sort of the rough back end. Obviously, when it's a public map, it'll be a lot nicer. So it comes up what kind of asset it is, the address. This is the roll number. This is for our mapping software, just so it can pin it to a parcel. The common name, which in this case is Kawartha Dairy. The heritage status is none. Then we have a whole list of features that I have not filled in yet, because a lot of this is background information, date of construction, architect, that kind of thing. Height, cladding, we'll fill that all in as we go along. I'm just trying to get everything in here. Our geographic context, Bobcaygeon, our themes that it's related to. So in this case, obviously industrial development and agriculture is Kawartha Dairy. And then we have our photos. So the photos are here and you can click on them. There they are, ta-da! So people can look at those, which is very exciting. There's another one here. I actually have a couple more photos that need to go on with this one. And then we will also have things like evaluation forms, any additional information, it'll all be attached there. So we have lots of these. This one's a little bit more complete than others. Obviously it's not, it's not very complete because we know what this building is. But yeah, so that's kind of where we're at with the inventory so far. So as I get the photos and the inventory sheets from everyone, I'll start plugging them in, and hopefully by the end of the year, we'll have a complete picture of Bobcaygeon for to share with the committee and also to share with council in the new year. We've also been working on the Bethany one with the Manvers Historical Society, but I need to get the information from them before I start plugging them in. So I've been focusing on the Bobcaygeon one right now. So it's looking pretty good. And there are a lot of assets so far. I think here there's about 125 heritage assets, which is substantial, and it's not done yet. So it will be really interesting to see when this is all done. So I just wanted to share that with everybody because I know that it's kind of a good news project that lots of people have been contributing to. All right, did anyone have any questions about that? That's really just an FYI. Cool, all good.
And question or statement?
Just a comment. I mentioned to you yesterday, Emily, that I just finished uploading all the heritage walking tour stuff that we did for Bobcaygeon. I'm away this next week, but when I come back, there's just a bit of tweaking I need to do. But once it's good, I can give you the link to the app. It's just a Google app. You can download it, and any of the heritage information that we've kind of collected on the buildings. And I have old photos too, if you're looking for old photos of the buildings to upload. So by the time I'm back, like the week of the 15th of November, I can give you access to the app, and you can take whatever you need from there too.
Sounds good. Yeah, cleaning up all these data points and getting a lot of that information in there is kind of my job for the rest of 2022. So we'll be working on that for a little bit, but I just wanted to show it to everybody because it's coming together really nicely.
Mm-hmm. Looks great.
Any other comments or questions? I think it looks wonderful, and I'm I think it'll be valuable when we can pull that up, or any individual can pull it up and have a look at the buildings as they are now and maybe as they were, and what the heritage information about the building is. I think it's a wonderful project. Thank you. All right, we need to receive this as
No, it's just an FYI. So I'll move on to the next. Okay, so forget everything you know about the Heritage Act because the government's changing it all. Okay, so not everything, but quite a little bit of stuff. I have a little slideshow for everybody. So our provincial government is very busy these days. And one of the things that they have been busy doing is making changes to a whole range of legislation. So I just have a bit of an overview for the committee about some changes that are being proposed to the Ontario Heritage Act under Bill 23, which is the More Homes Built Faster Act. Okay, so just the background on this, the Ontario government introduced the More Homes Built Faster Act, and it makes changes to a range of planning related legislation. So that includes us with the Heritage Act, but it also includes things like the Conservation Authorities Act, the Planning Act, the Development Charges Act. There are some other ones that I can't remember off the top of my head, but there's quite a few. This is very far-reaching legislation, and it's going to have some pretty significant impacts on how the city does land use planning in general. More specific to us, there are some substantial changes in approach, I would say, to heritage that we'll need to integrate into how we run our programming. So where we're at right now with this is that this is not finalized or passed. The amendments have been posted to the Environmental Registry of Ontario for commenting, and the commenting deadline is on November 24th. So these just came out last week. Yes, last week. So this is all pretty new stuff. So this is why we're sort of going through it with the committee tonight, and it's not on the agenda. So it's like, surprise, here we go. Okay, so there's some changes that impact municipalities. These include changes for the processes of listing properties for individual designation and the designation of heritage conservation districts. So this is kind of core stuff for the committee. And also core statutory function for the municipality with regard to the Ontario Heritage Act. So we're going to have to figure these ones out. There's some other changes that are related to provincial heritage properties, but they don't apply to municipalities. So that's what the standards and guidelines for provincial heritage properties, which I think has a slightly different name than that, but it doesn't apply to us. So we're not going to go through that. All right. So I'll just run through it all and then sort of talk about some next steps for us as a committee. Okay, so we'll start with the easy stuff first. So heritage conservation districts. So the first thing with heritage conservation districts is that the ministry would like to establish criteria for the designation of districts. This is not necessarily a bad thing, as we don't have consistent guidelines across the province for designating heritage districts. Also, just so everyone's aware, the Heritage Act has now changed ministries. So instead of being under the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Sport, or whatever they're called now, we're now under the Ministry of Citizenship and Multiculturalism for some reason that I don't know. So we've moved ministries. So MCM is Ministry of Citizenship and Multiculturalism. So that's what that is. What they're proposing is to use Ontario Regulation 906 for this purpose, and that HCDs must meet 2 of the 9 criteria available for designation. This is a bit of a cop-out, to be perfectly honest, because that regulation really does not fit with heritage districts. So on one hand, the criteria thing is a good idea, but the criteria they want to use don't really fit. So we'll see what happens with that. The criteria proposed by regulations, so even if this amendment does pass, the regulations will still have to be written as to what those criteria actually are. So we'll see how that one plays out. The 906 stuff is just a proposal from the ministry at the moment, so there may be some scope to change that. The next thing is the introduction of regulation to prescribe processes to repeal or amend heritage designations, HCD designations and plan, this is currently lacking. So in the Heritage Act right now, there's no process to repeal or amend a heritage conservation district plan, which is actually really, really problematic, especially for municipalities that have older heritage conservation districts. So depending on what the processes are and how it all works, this may end up actually being quite helpful for municipalities because I know that there is a big question about how do you make changes to an HCD plan, because right now you can't. So that we'll see where that goes. The processes haven't been established, and the ministry has indicated they're going to consult further on these processes. So the intent of the amendment is just to say that you can amend them or repeal them, which seems unlikely, but you can do it if you want. And that will be what they have in there. So fairly straightforward stuff with HCDs. All right, now we get into individual property designation. So they have now changed the threshold for designation. So under the current regulations of the Act, a property must meet one of the 9 criteria under Ontario Regulation 906 to be eligible for designation. A property now is going to have to meet 2 of the 9 criteria. To be perfectly honest, most of our properties meet more than 1, probably more than 2 of the 9 criteria. So it probably won't mean a huge change for what we're doing with individual designations, but it does mean that when we're putting together heritage evaluation reports and bylaws, we need to be very careful that we have a strong case for at least 2 of the criteria, just in case something goes to the Ontario Land Tribunal. So that's just something to keep in mind when we're looking at properties for designation. And this doesn't apply to properties that are already designated. So we're good. There's no sort of retroactive stuff on this one. The next one is a little bit more challenging. So in 2019, for those of you who are on the committee, and remember this, the ministry created a 90-day time limit for the issuing a notice of intention to designate when certain types of Planning Act applications are made for a property. So for those of you who weren't on the committee at the time, the scenario for this is, say, for example, an official plan amendment is made for a property that has a non-designated but historic building on it. The city could say, oh shit, there's a historic property on that building. We want it to be designated as a condition of the application. We're going to designate that. So those amendments meant that a municipality had to do that within 90 days of the Planning Act application being deemed complete, which we've now integrated into our policies and processes. So the government has now further changed this so that the timeline is retained, but if you want to designate the property, it already has to be listed on the Heritage Register prior to the planning application being received. This is going to present a few problems because you'll see on the next slide what happens with listed properties. So it's just something to keep in mind, and we'll have to figure out, this is really kind of an internal process type thing that I will be sorting out how we deal with this. This isn't an issue that comes up very often in Kawartha Lakes, but we certainly want to be able to, have that power under the Act to designate a property in conjunction with the Planning Act application. So we'll need to figure out how to deal with this particular item. Okay, now for the fun stuff, listing. So first thing, easy. Copy of the Heritage Register must now be available on a municipality's website. Frankly, this is a good idea, so all good. Ours is already on our website. The next one is about objections to a listing. So we just got one of these this evening. So the 2019 amendments to the Act added that new objection process for listing, but they said that you could only object to properties that were listed after the amendment came into effect. Well, they've now changed that, so you can object to any listing, no matter when the property was listed. We're going to have to make some policy changes to reflect that, but to be perfectly honest, it's not going to make a huge difference in terms of what we do. But the committee will receive some policies to review that will have to go forward to council with regard to that one. This is a big change, but it's also not a big change. The next one, so listed properties must now meet at least one criteria under Ontario Regulation 906 in order to be eligible for listing on the register. So previously, you didn't have to meet any criteria on the Ontario Regulation 906 to list a property. So all the stuff that we do with evaluating listed properties was completely unnecessary, but we do it to give property owners and council the information they need to list a property. This is not going to change how we do business at all. So that's fine. It's sort of it's an easy one, but it's a big change in terms of how we have to think about it, but it won't be a big change in terms of process. What this does not apply to is properties that are already listed prior to the amendments. So we don't have to go back and justify all the properties we've already listed, although we could probably do that fairly easily anyways. Okay, now the really fun stuff. So these are going to have a huge, huge impact on our heritage planning program. So the first one is if council moves to designate a listed property and the bylaw is passed or repealed on an appeal, the property must be removed from the register. That's fairly straightforward. This changes, this sort of changes what happens if a designation of a listed property is not successful, but the process is fairly straightforward. The next one is that non-designated properties that are currently on the register must have a notice of intention to designate issued within 2 years of the amendment coming into force or must be removed from the register. So effectively, this means we have to designate every single property that is on our register or remove it. That is what this means. So how we're going to approach that and what council wants to do with that is, well, we'll see. So we'll have 2 years from whenever the bill is proclaimed, which is not now. It will be later, but it's coming. So we're going to have a serious look at our listed properties and what we want to do with them. The next one is that very similar, is that if we add non-designated properties after the amendments come into force, we have 2 years to designate them or remove them from the register. And to prevent people just from removing and re-adding things to the register, if you remove it from the register, they can't be relisted for 5 years. So if you want something to have heritage protection, we have to designate it. That's pretty much how it is. So with the Planning Act applications, you better be pretty sure something's coming in soon if you're going to list it, pretty much, for the things that we talked about before. So this is a lot. I don't know exactly if these are all going to come into force. I know that there's some big concern from other municipalities, but now you know what is coming down the pipeline from our provincial government. Okay, so what the committee can do about this. So, I mean, you can do nothing if you want. That's completely up to the committee. But if the committee has some concerns or objections to this and would like to review it further, my recommendation is that our Heritage Act /policy subcommittee be reformed to have a look at this further and provide a response before November 24th, which is TikTok is coming up very soon. So as a staff member, I have been asked to provide comments by the ministry, as have other heritage planning staff across Ontario. And if the committee wishes to provide comments, I can include the committee's response in with my correspondence to the ministry, if that's something that the committee wants to do. So this is where we're at with this at the moment. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So yeah, those are the changes. I don't know where the ministry is going to land on this. I suspect, knowing this provincial government, there may be a few changes, but not very many. That's what happened in 2019. But yeah, so if there are things that the committee finds extremely problematic, I would say it's advisable to provide a response to the ministry. If you want to do it through that subcommittee, that's great. If you just want to do it as an entire committee, you can do that as well. But I do need them as soon as possible so that we can get those off, because I have to get my comments off to them as well.
Thank you, Emily, for going through that. Personally, I would like to see the committee reactivated. At least we go on the record saying what we think the legislation and the changes to the legislation. And I think sometimes the volume of feedback does affect what happens. And I think it should be that municipal heritage committees react not just staff members. I mean, I'm thankful that you do, Emily, but I think it shows that the municipal heritage committees are involved in this process. So my personal feeling is we should reactivate the committee as we did this before. So I'm in favor of doing it again. Any other comments or questions? For those who were on the committee before, we did this in the recent past when they fiddled with the act a year or so ago, and there were changes to what they act or didn't put the things that posed. And I'm sure that our input is going to be probably the image and comments that are made by professionals such as Emma, but I also think they need to hear from the public, and we're it. So that's my feeling. Can you review for us, Emily, who the members of that committee were, or would you wish a whole new membership?
I think every time we've activated that subcommittee, we've had new members. Because I think it just is like whoever wants to do it. Because I mean, we only pull it out when this sort of thing happens, which happens once every 3 or 4 years, right? So I think we can just reform it with whoever wants to be on it.
Well, I personally would like to be on it. Is there anybody else who would like to be on this subcommittee? I see Ian.
I would, but
Anyone
I'm
else?
away, Ethel, sorry.
Sandy? Anyone else, or we'll go with Ian, Athel, and Sandy. It would look like we have to do a reaction or so in order to meet your timetable, Emily.
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll just send out an email to you guys, and we'll coordinate a time that works for everybody. We'll probably do it next week at some point.
Are we allowed public facility, or because we're not anymore after this meeting? What's our position?
We're gonna have to do it on Zoom. It'll be that's sort of the way we're gonna have to do it.
Fine. So are there any others who would like to join in this wonderful process of citizens influencing legislation? We get very few opportunities as citizens to influence legislation, so I think it's a good fun thing to do.
I also will be away, so I can't commit, unfortunately. I would love to do it.
Okay, thank you. All right, then.
One thing I will say is just if people have email, if you do have specific comments, maybe it would make sense just to email them to me, and we can the subcommittee can review those as well. So if you have specific thoughts that you want to share, just share them by email, and then we'll the subcommittee can put together a coordinated response with everybody's comments in it, if that works for you, Athel.
I think that works, and maybe you'd like to that link have the changes. And
yeah, I'll send around a summary of all the changes so that people can read actually what the ministry, because mine was a summary of the summary of the summary.
Summary of the summary.
Yeah.
Okay, so do we need a motion to reform this?
Yeah.
So may I have someone move the reformation, not the reformation, but the reformation of the subcommittee? Julia, thank you. May I have a seconder? Anne, all those in favor? All right, the motion is carried. So thank you very much. There's nothing else that I know of. Is there, Emily?
Nope, that's it.
So not knowing who will be going forward into the new Municipal Heritage Committee, I just want to take an opportunity to say that I've certainly enjoyed working with every single one of you, and it's been a pleasure. So may I have a motion to adjourn? Anne, and a seconder, Julia. Thank you all very much for your in this,
Thank you.
and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Ethel.
Thank you, Ethel and
Thanks.
Emily too.